What are the tropes a romance novel needs to have?
I feel like there's no trope that a romance novel necessarily needs to have, other than, like I said, happy ending, which is not necessarily a trope, it's more of just like one of the defining traits of the genre. But I do think that tropes are not necessarily essential, but very valuable in romance, because I think what a lot of people enjoy about romance is that it feels easy to read, to get into, to get invested in, and it doesn't require a lot of huge intellectual investment to understand and to be a part of a story and to relate to the characters. And tropes are just a really great shorthand for communicating ideas and getting people on board a little bit faster, a little bit easier with what it is you're trying to say. So I think there's no individual trope that it would like, oh, that's really important or you need to have that. But I think using tropes well is something that's really powerful, especially in romance, because it allows the reader to connect quickly and really efficiently. And you find that you can communicate so much with very little by using these little, bite-sized bits of information that we all recognize and understand. And when we have these patterns that we have in romantic tropes, I think it's both comforting and it allows you to immediately invest yourself in the story, to be familiar with the language, to be familiar with the situation. And, if I say enemies to lovers, everybody knows what that means. Everybody can immediately go, oh, this is an enemies to lovers story. I know a ton about that already. I know how that works. You're thinking, well, some people argue that Romeo and Juliet is not enemies to lovers, that it's actually star-crossed lovers, or, what's the word I'm looking for? Their families are actually the enemies, sort of thing. But it gives you that sense of, oh, these people don't relate to each other at first. They learn to love each other over time. They grow emotionally attached. And, then this passion that once was negative becomes positive. And you can say that in, a very short amount of time. And when someone recognizes that trope in a book and, sees like, oh, I see where this is going, they're on board. They're immediately that much further in than they would have been, and you can bring them in quicker and not spend a ton of time on details, especially in the modern era where, I know very few people who would say, oh yeah, I have loads of time to read. I'm reading all the time. There are exceptions, and I, read quite a bit myself, but, time is precious. And if we can suddenly feel like we know the story, we know the characters, and we're, getting invested much quicker and more easily, then it's just going to be that much more of a pleasant reading experience. And so a romance has a lot of these tropes, and I think when used effectively, they can be really great and really convenient for both the reader and the writer.
Well, what are some of those tropes, aside from enemies to lovers? What are some of those tropes?
So friends to lovers is another classic one where, there's also a concept called mutual pining, which tends to go hand in hand with friends to lovers, which is basically they're both in love with the other, but they don't think the other one is in love with them. And there's kind of that it happens a lot with friends to lovers, because I really love them, but they just see me as a friend, and the other one thinks the same, and how do they come together, sort of thing. There's a concept about only one bed, which is, they both end up in a cabin and they're snowed in and there's only one bed in the room and they have to share, and, inevitably they end up cuddling for warmth or something, or more, but there's so many. There's a lot of books on brother's best friend, the kind of forbidden romance is a trope in itself, but there are several specific forbidden romance, like brother's best friend, or some people do step siblings, and that's a more outrageous trope, but it's the forbidden thing, or like affair with a boss, you know, some of these things where there's kind of some level of structure around it that we understand. And you go like, oh, okay, I see the setup. I see what's going on here. And you don't necessarily, you know, have to be introduced to the concept because it's familiar. You've seen something like this before. You've heard of the concept before. There's, you know, like in fan fiction, there's the concept of hurt comfort, where, you know, one person is injured or, you know, in some way insulted, or they're sick or something happens to them, and the other character is their caretaker and they're taking care of them and helping them, sort of thing. And there are some that are like specific to fan fiction, like there's the whole werewolves, Omegaverse stuff that it has sort of become mainstream fiction, but started off as fan fiction, mostly in the queer community. And they have kind of their own sets of rules for how werewolves work. And there's alpha wolves and beta wolves, and the alpha wolves meet with omegas, and like there's a whole system kind of built in, and some of them are really structured like that, and some of them are just more, you know, broad, like enemies to lovers.
Are there any alternative endings that are just sort of unacceptable in the romance community, or there's no hard and fast rule?
I think, I mean, unacceptable would be they break up. Like, firmly unacceptable. No one likes that one. I think the only people who argue with that really are authors who want to write that. But the readers pretty much all agree they can't break up. That can't be the ending. That can't be where it ends. There's a concept of both happily ever after and happy for now, and both are acceptable. Happily ever after is obviously they get married, they have babies, right off into the sunset, everything's good. Happy for now just means they're together, things are going well, there's no dark cloud over the horizon, end of book, right? And both of those are acceptable. I would say one that is really divisive and alienates a lot of readers is anything involving cheating. They're a little more forgiving if it's like, oh, the main character is cheating on a really terrible partner. You know, the partner is just awful and they're cheating with this other man and they fall in love, or other woman and they fall in love. They're a little more accepting of that, but cheating is tough. I think a lot of people in the genre of romance specifically, they don't tolerate that. Readers do not want the negativity, the reality that comes with cheating storylines and how that makes them feel. And a lot of books will specifically say somewhere in their descriptions, like no cheating, or sometimes they'll say safe, or, you know, happy ending guaranteed, or things like that, to reassure people that this will not be that kind of book. You do not have to worry about that. But technically, there are romance books that involve cheating storylines. It's just they do tend to alienate a lot of readers, and some readers are very against them entirely.
And is that because you go along on the ride and you become invested?
I think so. I think I think cheating can kind of break the illusion in a way. You know, there is this level of fantasy, level of like, this is, you know, we're talking about their bond and it's special. And I think a lot of people like to think that, you know, there's such a thing as the one and soulmates, and that only these two people are perfect for each other and connected. And even if that's not the case, I think cheating has the potential to break them out of that, you know, positive, fuzzy feeling, because it's more real. You know, this is the kind of thing that happens in real life that can, you know, really ruin a relationship and can cause really hurt feelings. And a lot of people have personal experiences with cheating, and it immediately brings them to that. It's kind of the same reason that we don't see, you know, books where people are doing their taxes. You know, like, you're not going to see these life details that people don't enjoy. You know, we don't want to, you know, read a book and then this person get really sick and they spend 20 pages dealing with the insurance company. You know, that's not something that is going to appeal to us, because books are escapism. And there are certain things that will pull you back into the real world, and most people don't want to spend their free time reading pulled back into the real world. They don't want to be thinking about, you know, consequences and things going wrong and, you know, divorce and cheating and these other realities that, you know, we do have to deal with, but we wouldn't choose to deal with. It's something that is, you know, a consequence of living in the real world and not necessarily something that we would ever seek out. So those things, you know, anytime you're addressing something dark or overly realistic, it's a really fine line that you have to carefully walk, because you can bring the reader down in such a way that they don't want to keep going. That they're like, hey, I came here for fun, I came here for fantasy, I came here for a good time. I did not come here for reminding me of these horrible things that exist in the real world. And like, I think they're completely fine if you're like, oh yeah, like this dark wizard is after you and they're gonna, you know, throw a fireball at you. Great, fine, love that. And it's like, oh, this, you know, evil internet troll is after you. Well, I don't want that. like there's this fine line where they will absolutely tolerate drama and tension and conflict, and that is fine. But the more real it becomes, the more, you know, uncanny and uncomfortable it becomes, and the more they're turned off of the story.